the Shelby American Collection here in Boulder, Colorado, has the finest collection of Shelby race cars in the world, and they're all here.
So guys, if you're a fan of either Ford or Shelby or the Shelby Mustang or the Shelby Heritage, this is the place to come. And Steve is the president, Steve Folk, of this museum. So what we're going to do on this very special episode of TFL is we're going to take a walk around and kind of talk about some of the cars. And then at the end of this episode, we're going to show you how you can get a GT350R for what, 25 bucks?
Yeah, $25.
It's a raffle. Let's
well, it's a drawing.
It's a drawing.
Yeah. So,
but 25 bucks for a chance to get a GT350R? Actually, I may buy one of those raffle tickets. But let's start with this car, Steve. This is a very important car. It's the very first car that Shelby ever made. It's actually his own personal car.
That's right. So, back in 1962, this is CSX 2000, and this is where it all started. Carroll was a great race car driver. He ran in Europe, he won Le Mans driving for Aston Martin, but he had a congenital heart problem. So in 1960, by 1960, he was racing with nitroglycerin tablets under his tongue. He was in a lot of pain, and the doctors told him, you either got to stop racing or die. So he stopped racing, but he had this dream about taking a European chassis, which handled superbly, but he felt was underpowered, and putting a V8 in it, a Ford V8, well, an American V8.
Yeah. I mean, he worked with a lot of different car companies throughout his. So
that's right.
Yeah, he was a little bit of a hustler.
He was. Let's call it entrepreneur.
He was an entrepreneur in the best sense of the American.
Exactly. So he basically, he had this vision to build the Cobra, and the name Cobra came to him in a dream. But he basically went to the AC car company and said, hey, I got this deal with Ford, which he didn't. And then he went to Ford and said, I got this deal with AC, the AC car company. And they provided him with the AC Bristol, basically rollers. And this was the first Cobra that he built. And initially it was in bare aluminum, and it went out to different car magazines, painted different colors so that the public thought that he had more cars than he did.
Now, we should be very clear about the fact that CSX, that's the serial number, actually the VIN number. So Shelby was assigned CSX, and then how many Cobras are there altogether?
There's about 1,007.
Real ones.
Yeah, real ones.
And there's about 170,000 fake ones, right?
Right,
So
exactly.
We were talking, so I always go to Cars and Coffee, and I see a Cobra, and I'm like, is that a real one? Is that a real one? And of course, it's a Super Performance, which actually has a continuation numbers, or it's a Factory 5, but
or out of Shelby American Las Vegas.
or Shelby,
they're
continuation
building
cars.
Yeah.
But there are 1,000 real ones about, give or take, right?
Yeah.
And every one we see here is a real Cobra.
Right, and the factory team cars, they made about 36 or so of those, and we've got a number of them here. I should tell you a little bit about the museum.
Yes.
The Shelby American Collection here in Boulder, Colorado, we started this in 1996 and started as a nonprofit. And it really came out of the fact that a lot of us had a number of Cobras, we were racing Cobras, and we were good friends with Carroll Shelby. And what struck us is that Carroll did so much for the automotive industry. He ushered in the muscle car era with the Shelby Mustang. We'll talk about that in a minute. He won the World Manufacturers Championship in 1965. He won the USRRC, United States Road Racing Championship, in '64. He did a lot, and there was no one, there was not a dedicated museum anywhere in the world to his accomplishments. So we approached him because he was a friend, in 1996 and said, hey, we're willing to do this museum. It'll be an all-volunteer nonprofit, but we're not going to do it unless you're going to be behind it and you want us to do it. And he said, I absolutely do. I'm behind you 100%, and I'll support you. I'll be there for you as long as I'm vertical.
Yes.
And he kept his word. Of course, he got sick in 2011 and then passed away in 2012.
Yeah. But he was, if there is such a thing as a classic American story, it's certainly him.
Oh, absolutely.
Rags to riches. You mentioned a lot of his accomplishment. I think the one that's probably the most famous is, of course, that his team beat Ferrari at their own game.
Right.
Not just once, and not just in kind of a simple way. Ferrari, of course, was dominating the World Racing Championships at that time, and Ford came. Well, I'll let you tell the story.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let's tell a story. Let's tell it by going through the cars and.
Okay, let's do that. We have in the front of the museum here. These are the three most significant Cobras of all. Of course, the very first Cobra, CSX 2000, and the museum acquired this last year. The Larry H. Miller family purchased it at auction, RM Auctions in Monterey, and so we have it here. This is where it all started. And then we've got one of the 6 Daytona coupes, and this is the best of the 6. This is the Le Mans, Daytona, and Sebring winner. And this won Le Mans in '64. It was first in GT. It was 4th overall. It would have been 1st overall too, but they had a oiling problem, a cooling problem, so they kind of limped in. Driven by Bob Bondurant and Dan Gurney. And then, this is a nicely restored example. Now, this is one of the FIA Cobras. They initially built 5. They were to run in Europe. Only 2 are surviving. This one is completely original. It has not been restored.
And I can tell by the big dent over here.
Yeah, it's got dents and it's really. Let's walk around the side here because first of all, I'll tell you about FIA, the FIA Roadsters. This is the last in the series, and the most aggressive in terms of flares, and it's known as a cut back door car. They had to cut into the door to accommodate the rear flares, and when this car started running, it ran in Europe in '64 and in '65, driven by Phil Hill, Bob Bondurant, Roy Salvadori, Sir John Whitmore. It's got 5 first-place FIA wins. So in the '64 season, Carroll was running the coupes and a few of the Roadsters, the FIA Roadsters, and they were Viking blue. That was the team color. You can kind of see it here. And then for '65, he switched to the Guardsman blue, and Alan Mann was running the program in Europe, and he just quickly resprayed these a Guardsman blue. But this is the original paint. It's also the 2012 Pebble Beach winner.
It's wonderful to see a car that hasn't been restored, right? To see the dents and everything. It's like classic furniture. Once you restore it, you take the value out of it, and that's kind of where cars are going as well, right? Because this tells you the story of the race car. There's a sense of provenance. There's a sense of the dirt, the grime, and the energy and the talent that it took to win those races. Once you make it like that, right?
You can only do it once.
You can only do it once, right? It's
exactly.
Only the original once, and so it's wonderful to actually, see the leather and how these guys race these cars in their original condition. And let's face it, I mean, these were fast cars, right?
They were really fast.
They were really fast cars, and now of course race cars are very safe, and the race car drivers, in lieu of a horrible accident, usually tend to survive incredibly dangerous crashes. These cars, you got in a crash, you were done.
You were done, and it's interesting that you mentioned that because you'll notice the forward brace on the roll bar is missing on this car, and it's because in '65, Sir John Whitmore, when he drove it, he felt that the forward brace got in his way. It hampered his style. He was hitting his elbow on it. He told the guys to cut it off. I mean, it's astounding because behind him is 42 gallons of race fuel in an aluminum, thin aluminum tank. So the FIA Roadsters were interesting cars because when they went over to Europe, they had to have all the FIA requirements. You had to have a full windshield. But even so, aerodynamically, the guys slotted the windshield so that it's normally upright when it went through scrutiny. And then when they'd start the race, somebody'd reach up and yank it down You can see the rake on it is pretty extreme.
How fast were these cars? What was the top end?
Oh, about 185.
185, okay.
Yeah.
And the Daytona Cobras?
The Daytona Coupes would go faster. They were more aerodynamic.
Yeah.
I mean, from a running gear standpoint, they have the exact same running gear. So other interesting things about the FIA Cobra is you had to run a speedometer. So they put a speedometer in. It's not hooked up. You can see it on the passenger side.
But it's there.
But it's there. And then the FIA suitcase had to fit into the trunk. And in '64, when they went over, they weren't prepared. It wouldn't fit. So they had to hammer out the trunk. You can see the nubs on the back. Those are known as the FIA nubs. So you could close the trunk on the FIA suitcase.
So you could fit a suitcase.
Exactly.
And of course, that's kind of like the gurney bubble too, right? That's a very similar thing where they have.
That's
to
right.
do that. Let's keep going through the museum. Let's show them some of the other cars. We'll kind of walk through and give you guys a sense for some of the vehicles here. Now, of course, Shelby put his name on a lot of different vehicles. Let's talk about this one. This is a GT, obviously. It's one of the early GTs, right? It's a Mark 1.
It's a Mark 1. This is actually the fourth GT40 built. This is 104. And those of you that know GT40 history know that initially John Wyer was running the team in '64, and he had two cars. He had 103 and 104. We actually have 103. It's in restoration, but it's normally here. And John Wyer in the '64 season, he never finished a race. He was a great guy, and he was the go-to guy. For instance, he ran the Aston Martin team when Shelby won Le Mans in '59. But he was running these with Colati gearboxes and Barani wire wheels, and they were heavy. And Ford had it. By the end of the '64 season, they fired him and gave the program to Shelby. And he immediately put in Cobra race engines and Halobrand magnesiums. And he moved to the ZF transaxle. And the GT40s won their first race at Daytona in '64.
So let's tell kind of the backstory of why these cars exist, and it has to do with the fact that Ford actually tried to purchase Ferrari.
Right.
Right. So Ford was at that time. Ford was a big company, and Ford was and Ferrari was a little manufacturer of specific race cars, and so they came very close to a deal. And it was Henry Ford Jr. right at that time.
Yes.
Yeah. He got together with Ferrari and decided that he was going to buy the company. At the very last minute, Ferrari pulled out of the deal and basically did a big FU to Ford, and Ford did not take that sitting down. So Ford thought, I'm going to go to Europe, I'm going to beat them at their own game, and that's how the Shelby partnership was formed, and that's why this car was built.
That's right.
And the first year they didn't do so well.
Yeah, and actually,
now the car's finished.
when the Deuce, Henry Ford II,
Yep.
when the deal with Ferrari blew up, he told his guys, I don't care what it takes, get me build or acquire a sports racer that we can humiliate Ferrari at the 24 Hours of Le Mans. And in that moment in time, Eric Broadley had introduced at the Birmingham Car Show the Lola Mark 1. He only built 3 of them. And the Ford guys converged and said, hey, you want to work with us? Because it was a steel monocoque, it had a small V8 in it. And from the Lola Mark 1 came this early GT40. And it's kind of a narrow-bodied, the Halobrand wheels are not super big compared to where the GT40s went, and we'll look at some of the more advanced cars.
If I remember right, too, these things were pretty terrifying at speed, right? Their aerodynamics weren't really sorted on them.
That's right.
And they got really light and really terrifying when you got them up to like...
Well, if we take a look at the nose, this is a short nose car,
Yep.
Really early, and you can see that when the Shelby guys got a hold of it, which was in the fall of '64, when through their testing, you can see all the aluminum bodywork that they added to try to stabilize and get some downforce. And so, but they only had 6 weeks with these two cars, 103 and 104, from the time Ford flew them into LAX. They went to Daytona and they won, and that in '65.
Let's go show them the other marks, because you've got more of them.
Yeah.
Let's go show them. This is the Mark 1. This museum has probably the finest collection of Ford GT cars in the world. And there they are. Look at them. And now you have, of course, a lot of different Cobras here.
Yeah, we need to talk about these early Cobras too. I don't know how we're doing on time.
Let's go finish the story of the GTs, because
Okay.
that's the Mark 1. Let's show them the Mark II and kind of show them the differences. And then, of course, these were the cars that eventually won Le Mans and really did humiliate Ferrari.
Yeah, we've got a really interesting collection here of GT40s. You can see that's a Mark III. That was the GT40 road car, and they had this idea that they would build a road car. Problem was, it was like $18,000. They only made about 7 of these things. I mean, it's a beautiful car, but it just didn't take off, because in that time frame you could buy a Daytona Ferrari for what, $12,000, and so this was a Ford, and it was $18,000. And then this is a Mark I. This is the 21st car built. So the first one I showed you over there was the 4th car. This is 1021, driven by Brian Redman in Europe. And then here is a Mark II, a GT40 Mark II, and this was the '66 Le Mans winner. And depending on your view of history, it either was the first place car or the second place
because
car.
it was a
Right.
You want to tell them that story? It's an interesting story.
Yeah. Ken Miles drove this car at Le Mans in '66. You know, it's a big block. It has a 427 engine in it. And he, according to Shelby American records, he was a lap ahead when the Ford guys wanted everybody to slow down. And
so it's 1, 2, 3.
1, 2, 3.
So they made him slow down.
They made him slow down, and as they were coming across the finish line, this is very controversial. You know, Bruce McLaren, who was driving the black 1046, sped up a little bit, but they still thought at the finish that Ken Miles had won, and he actually went up to the podium. But then the French determined that the McLaren car, the French thought they were all on the same lap. Shelby American believed that Ken Miles was a lap ahead, but nonetheless, the French thought they were on the same lap. They said, wait a minute, you know, Bruce McLaren was a little farther ahead at the finish, but Bruce McLaren in the black Mark II was gridded further back, so he technically won the race because he ran more he went further in the 24 hour. But anyway,
that's the car that basically won Le Mans.
Right. So
either first or second,
depending on your view of history.
Yeah.
And then one of the things that happened after the '66 win, the photo finish, you know, Henry was ecstatic, you know, of winning 1, 2, 3. But the European press said, you know, that's really a Lola GT, you know, because it's an English car. Yep. It was derived from. And Henry got upset, and he told his guys, he said, look, we're going to be back here in '67 with a brand new car, whatever it costs, you know, it's going to from the ground up, no interchangeable parts with a Mark I or Mark II. And so the Mark IV was born.
And guys, you have to keep in mind that this was a heated contest with Ferrari, right? It wasn't like Ferrari was sitting back and not trying to win this. Ferrari had ruled Le Mans for probably the previous 10 years or something? Yeah, it was all Ferraris.
It was all Ferrari.
And Ferrari was doing the best that he could during this time to try to beat Ford at his game, and was unsuccessful in doing that. So it was quite a victory. Keep in mind, of course, Ford had a lot more financial ability, but Ferrari had a very deep engineering team.
That's right. That's absolutely right. And so the guys scrambled to build a new car, and they wanted to use new materials. And there was a new material called aluminum honeycomb that was being used in the aerospace industry. So they got Ford Aerospace and Brunswick Aerospace, and they built these cars with the tubs are aluminum honeycomb. And it's 427. They only made really 6 of the Mark IVs. You're seeing 2 of the 6. They made a couple early J cars.
Let's show them the other one.
But Mario Andretti drove both these cars. This was the Sebring winner. He drove this at Sebring in '67, won that race. And then in '67 at Le Mans, they took 4 Mark IVs. Mario Andretti drove.
People are asking about values of these cars currently. That's kind of the main theme of the questions.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So let's talk about values. You guys are asking about the values of these cars. It's public knowledge. The very first Cobra that Shelby built sold for $12.5 million. Right?
13.75
$13.75 million
last year
for the first one. So these are not inexpensive cars. I mean, this is as American as it gets. It's a limited number. People know the Cobra. People love the Cobra. And these are very unique cars and part of our history that can't be recreated. So yeah, I mean, you know, a lot of these cars probably have not been for sale. How did you get all these cars? How
Well,
did you get such a deep collection of so many historically important Shelby cars?
we started a long time ago, and some of these cars are owned by the Larry H. Miller family. Some are owned by myself. Some are owned by local collectors and other collectors around the country. And we just felt that they needed to be on display for the public and needed to be accessible for the public. I mean, in terms of values, the Mark IVs, one has not traded hands for decades. But this Gulf Team card it's public record. It was purchased in 2012 at auction, and it was $11 million back in 2012.
So if people want to come here and check out the collection, what's the website that they would go to kind of?
Oh, it's ShelbyAmericanCollection.org. And then also we've got a very active Facebook page, and we constantly have events here in car clubs and come through. And speaking of events, our big annual party and car show is September 2nd. We take over the entire cul-de-sac. We'll have a great car show. Bob Bondurant will be here, and Ellen Grant, and Tom Yeager, and Dave McDonald's son, Rich McDonald, will be here giving a presentation too. So you'll be able to get signatures and rub shoulders with these guys. It's a really good time. Barbecue.
So go to is it ShelbyAmericanCollection.org?
Yes.
Yep. Check that out. And of course, what we'll do is we'll do a link in this video in the description, so people just have to click on that link and it'll take you right there. And before we get done with this, of course, we'll also tell you how you have a chance to win that new Shelby GT350R. But let's keep going. Let's talk about some of the other cars.
Yeah, I mean, just to finish up the GT40 story. So obviously Ford won Le Mans in '67 with the Mark IV, and we're actually celebrating the 50th anniversary. I mean, that's the theme of our event this year. And basically the French outlawed the car. It was too fast. They changed the rules, and so you remember John Wyer. We talked about him, that he initially had the GT40 program, and Ford fired him, gave it to Shelby. Shelby started winning. Well, after the '67 race that Ford won, Henry Ford II, the Deuce, said, "We're done. We spent a lot of money. We won in '66. We won in '67. I think we've proven our point." But John Wyer wanted to redeem himself, so he went to the Gulf Oil Company and said, "Hey, I can go back to the steel monocoque Mark I, but souped up, and if you'll write the check," which the Gulf Oil Company did, then I'll start racing these. And he won Le Mans with basically Mark I in '68 and '69. Now our car, they made 3 of these Gulf Team cars. Our car has an interesting history in that it was used in the Steve McQueen movie, Le Mans. And McQueen actually bought the car, because back in the '70s they were very inexpensive, and he was looking for a camera car, something that could keep up with the 917s and the Ferraris that were in his.
Reconnecting.
Okay, we're up. We're good.
Yep.
Okay, sorry.
So you can see this is our car at the set of Le Mans, and the top is cut off. This poor dude had to sit there with a lap belt at 185, 190 miles an hour and film in front of the 917s and then behind the 917s. And here's Steve McQueen, he's standing next to his 917. So the GT40s, even though, this design goes back to, the
early 60s.
The early 60s, it still was competitive and fast enough to chase 917s and lead 917s in McQueen's movie.
I think you put the top back on.
Yeah, top's back on.
Good.
Yeah.
And this one doesn't have the gurney bump.
No.
So the gurney bump, why don't you explain it?
Yeah. So the The Mark IV is a really low car. GT40s are called GT40s because they're 40 inches tall. The Mark IV is 38 inches tall. And to shoehorn, Mario Andretti drove this, no problem. I mean, he's my size. But Dan Gurney's a tall guy, and they couldn't, even though they lowered the seat as much as they couldn't get him in the car with a helmet and shut the door. And so that's where the Gurney bubble on the red Mark IV came about.
The question, of course, is how did Shelby get into the cars? Because he was really tall.
Yeah.
He had a really probably.
Yeah, but most of the cars that he raced, when he raced, Aston Martin, and
his convertibles,
and the Ferraris, like the 410 Ferrari that he raced, were all roadsters.
Let's talk about some of the other cars you have.
I have an interesting question. About the $100 in the glove box.
Oh yes.
Or is that true?
No, that's true, and that's good timing. Okay. So here's a 427, back from '66, and this is a street car. So you can see that it doesn't have a roll bar. And what Carroll would take a street car like this, and he would open the glove box, put a $100 bill halfway in it, and slam it shut. Put a member of the press in there and say, "Look, I'm going to go 0 to 100 miles an hour, and then I'm back down to 0. And if you can get the $100 bill, you can keep it." And so he would rev it up, dump the clutch, make one shift into second, get up to red line, 100 miles an hour, slam on the brakes, and go back down to 0. And that would take about 13 seconds. And nobody ever got the $100 bill. And I should tell you that the 427 Cobra, this weighs about 2,400 pounds or so with the big block in it. This was the world's fastest production car for decades. It wasn't until, the late 80s, early 90s, when the four-wheel drive Lamborghinis and all the other supercars came out, that it eclipsed this kind of performance.
What I love about the Cobras, of course, is that they're not only fast, they're not only loud, but they're beautiful, right? I think that's what people fall in love with them, because these are cars that harken back to a day when race car drivers had to have real cojones, right? There was no technology except that which you brought to the table, which was your skill and your lack of fear, or your fear, to actually take these out and drive them to the limit. And a lot of people died in them. A lot of people, these were hard cars to drive. You had to have a serious amount of expertise to drive these cars fast. And of course today we've got all kinds of technology that makes cars much safer.
Yeah.
From ABS to launch control to, all kinds of airbags. These cars, you lived and died by your own skill.
You're absolutely right. And like on the GT40s, it was two guys to run a 24-hour race. There were no cool suits. There were no radios. I mean, you didn't know, other than the flagman, you didn't know what was going on, and the pit signs. And incidentally, you can see, it's kind of interesting, in the very back, we have an extra engine for this. Look at the size of the big block, the 427. And then right behind it is Mario's pit sign from the '67 Le Mans, so they could signal to him how he was doing on laps and so on.
And of course, they did the classic Le Mans start, if you go over that poster, right?
Yeah.
Where they had to jump in the car, start it, and go roaring.
Yeah,
down.
and come running from across the track.
Which is crazy for a 24-hour race, but.
Yeah, in talking with Dan Gurney, what it was like in the Mark IV, which he won at the '67 Le Mans, he said you would jump in and take off, and then when you were down the Mulsanne Straight, he said I would drive with my knees. He's 220 miles an hour.
Put the seatbelt on.
And put the seatbelts on.
Yeah.
And
or not.
Or not.
Yeah, I think a lot of those guys back in the day didn't bother with the seatbelts.
But you're right. I mean, these guys that Ford just won Le Mans again in the new Ford GT, but they had 5 or 6 drivers and cool suits and radios and automatic, telemetrics and the whole 9 yards.
Questions that we?
Yeah, we've got a lot of interest in that red car behind you.
Oh.
And the raffle car as well.
Okay, let's go to that one, then we'll go to the raffle car. It's kind of
Okay.
a good theme, yeah. So obviously you have more than just Cobras here. You have a lot of the Shelby Mustangs here as well. The original, this looks like a GT.
Yeah, what we've got here, we got a lineup here of 66, 67, and 68. And from our standpoint, after 67, 68, cars were on a decline, and with emissions and safety equipment and so on. What's interesting about this lineup here is, first of all, this is the one and only GT350S, 1966. And here's a shot of it when it was completed. And Carroll had this idea, he had this plan to make a whole series of cars that were GT350Ss for supercharged. And so this was the prototype car. You can see the Paxton supercharger in it. The prototype supercharged car for 1966. And this was also the very first Shelby that was painted a color other than white. So this is a very significant car. It's a prototype Paxton supercharged. It's the GT350S, the only one they made. And this was donated to the museum by the Steve and Joyce Yates Foundation.
Okay, what's next?
Next, we've got a really nice example of a 67 GT500 and this beautifully restored car. It's it was a national award winner because of how well it's restored. And you'll notice that it's even got the nice overspray and the chalk marks and all the right stuff.
And then the red one, would somebody want to know about?
Yeah, the red one is a GT500. It's a KR, King of the Road. Interesting story about the KR. Carroll had he had heard rumors that Chevrolet was about to trademark the KR, the King of the Road. And so he quickly scooped him and came out with his own GT500 KR.
All right, well, let's go look at the red one over here because this is one that you guys can own, actually. So this is a car that you guys are raffling off. How much are raffle tickets?
For $25. We're doing a drawing. Every year we give away a new Shelby Mustang. This is a 2017 GT350R. And we're going to do the drawing for this on September 2nd. And oh my, I mean, this is carbon wheel and Michelin.
This is the race car.
This is a race car.
$67,000 on the Monroney. So if you're interested in this car and you want to go for the raffle ticket, where would they go to get a raffle ticket?
Oh, you can go to our site, or you can just go to ShelbyMustangContest.org. And yeah, we're going to do the drawing on September 2nd.
So this could be yours. Tommy, are you gonna pop $25 and see if you can bring this thing home? It's beautiful. It's absolutely beautiful. So before we wrap up, let's pick one more car and kind of highlight it. Maybe the one in the corner there we were talking about, the race car. I think that
would be a good one. I should tell you, on this car, the dealers are getting $100K plus for these, and so you can. I would love to enter, but I can't because I'm part of the museum. But
yeah, if you win it, it'll be very suspicious.
Yeah, it would be very suspicious. So if you're, all the volunteers at the museum, we can't enter, but boy, I'd sure like to. This is race red. It's got 20 miles on it. We've shown incredible restraint. We want to take it out and
give it a little bit of a run around the neighborhood here, huh?
But we haven't done it.
All right, let's go look at this last car.
Okay.
This is a very special Cobra. It's one that let's walk over there. I'm just amazed that you said there are about 1,000 real Cobras, give or take, right? It's hard because people have crashed them, then rebuilt them.
Well, we should talk about this really quickly.
Yeah, sure.
This is the 1964 USRRC, United States Road Race championship car that Ken Miles drove. And this was Ken's personal car. So you'll notice on the USRRC, in that venue, you could run a short windshield compared to the FIA Cobras that had to have a full windshield on it.
Now, if I recall, these are like little details that people might think these are bumpers, but they're really not. They're basically lifts, so you can lift the car up right there. They look like bumpers. But
they look like bumpers,
but you put a lift in and you
exactly. And we've got it's a quick jack where you could just run it up when the car came in the pits. And one guy could push it down and lift the whole front of the car.
Yeah, one of the things that made Cobra so incredibly fast was you were just so light.
Yeah.
Right, the power to weight ratio was incredible.
Then we've got some other USRRC racers here, and then this is a 427 SC race car, this number 99 car.
I love the air intakes on them. They're just so gorgeous, right? Even those the two in the bottom.
Yeah.
And the giant.
Yeah, the center scoop, of course, for the oil cooler, and then those little ones that you were pointing to are for the brakes.
Yeah, they're really cool.
All right, so we're going to talk about the early Cobras, and we happen to have the Riverside car here. It's another car out of the Larry H. Miller collection, but this is the third Cobra built, and it's the first race car. It's known as the Riverside car, or the Billy Krause car. It didn't have a super successful racing career. You know, it would break hubs or overheat, but it's interesting. You can see the evolution. It has these spats on it, which were a requirement, FIA requirement, so that you covered the wheel. It didn't have vents on the side of it, but they tried vents on the top, and has early hardware. But this was driven by Dave McDonald and Ken Miles and Billy Krause. It's a very significant car, the very first Cobra race car.
Beautiful.
But
it's red. It's weird. It's red. I mean, all the other ones are blue, of course.
Exactly. So he made one Riverside car, and this is it. And then the next series were the Sebring Cobras, and they made 3 of those. We have one in the collection, but it's out on loan right now. But next were the Cobra Le Mans, and Carroll made 3 of these. And we have 2 of the 3 here in the museum, and this one is very significant because this is the first Cobra to win an FIA race. So in 1963, this is known as the Cobra that was first blood, struck first blood. Now, the Cobra Le Mans cars were designed to run with tops, although only one of the 3 ever had a top, to be more aerodynamic. So they have short trunks so they can accommodate a hard top. You can also see we have one of the Dragon Snakes. You know, Cobras were very versatile vehicles. And Carroll made a series of what are known as Dragon Snakes, where they're dragsters. So you can see it's got the open pipes and big slicks on the back.
So I have to ask you the last question before we say goodbye. You knew Carroll yourself?
Yes.
What was he like?
He was an amazing guy. An idea a minute. He never stopped going, even though he had a heart transplant and then later on a kidney transplant. He was a super guy and a good friend, and we miss him dearly.